Welcome to Narratives Leadership Story Talks, where great leaders go beyond the bottom line to create lasting impact. Join hosts Jerome Deroy and Julienne Ryan as they uncover the stories behind real-world challenges, offering practical insights to help you lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. Each episode dives into how leaders use storytelling to build trust, foster connection, and inspire action. Whether you're navigating workplace dynamics, driving change, or building high-performing teams.
We all have stories. So let's create some really good dialogue where we understand one another and what our needs are. And then when organizational policies or, senior leaders say something, then let's do it out of being authentic to what our people need. Let's not, put in a prayer room without understanding that a prayer room also needs washing facilities. That's a tick box exercise. But instead, if we spoke to someone who said, this is something that is deeply rooted to who I am, and here's what it means to me, and here's what I'm looking for, then do it from that perspective rather than from a, rushing to put something on our website or to say something to our employees. I think people can hear when it's disingenuous.
All right. Well, that was Sona Sherratt, she was on episode 125 of Leadership Story Talks. And I chose that excerpt because what struck a chord for me was the disconnect between policies and what employees are told through memos or broad emails, et cetera, around initiatives that are taken to create a better sense of belonging everywhere, right? And what she was talking about was, rather than copy paste something because you think, oh, that checks the box, it's rather take the perspective of the human being that is going through something that actually exists in your organization right now. Don't try to do something for people that aren't in your organization, but rather look at who's there and what the needs are, and then create policies that originate from that perspective, because otherwise it will feel disingenuous. And I think we've all had that experience where some new policy comes in and it's a new acronym and there's jargon attached to it and it feels very vague and abstract. And many people feel like it doesn't actually relate to them, or that the reason why it was done was more to check that box than anything else. So I thought we could maybe talk a little bit about that and give some pointers to our audience. What do you think?
Yes, this could be a multi-episode topic, could go over multiple episodes. Whether a company has a program or not does not preclude you from looking around and listening to what your colleagues and your coworkers are experiencing and being proactive, not waiting for a program to help you. And I think some of the pushback sometimes on programs, having been part of organizations internally, is employees and staff think it's about conversion and you must embrace everything wholeheartedly. What I think is a better way to do, and why stories and what we do in our workshops and our coaching set, it's showing people how to listen to each other and develop context and appreciation. And many times when we were talking, I didn't learn my best lessons about diversity and inclusion in classrooms with PowerPoints. It was sitting in a stairwell with a colleague and hearing them share what their experience was. It was talking to another colleague about, their experience as a minority in a community. It was small moments that broke it down and got me from oh, that's just a complaint to, oh, there's something there and I have not been paying attention to it. And what can I do or say? So I think this is a call to not ignore or pretend things are not there. I still think we need to pay attention of what's around us, but to look at where we can be accountable
Mm.
and put the onus on ourself, our team, our language, and what we want the humanity of the workplace to look like. And it starts with respect. I have a memory of some horrible interaction happening in front of a poster that was declaring all the great values of a company, and I'm like, I think we're a little bit out of integrity here. So I think it is a call to action. Um, what's in vogue is not always in the best fashion for us, is the philosophy I'm working with, and to not ignore things.
Mm. And imagine, I think your example is great of your own experience of sitting in a stairwell with someone and how much you learned through that interaction and that story, those stories you were sharing with one another. Imagine now if that story or those stories that were shared in the stairwell could actually permeate the entire organization or a team or a division, and that there was a way to create spaces in which those stories could not only be told, but also shared much more widely. And that's, to me, the stories of real human beings that are currently in the organization or of human beings that represent who you want to have in your organization. That's where people need to focus is, what are those stories? And it comes back to this question that we always ask at Narrative, which is, why do I need a story and why now? And so many organizations that we work with are looking at this acronym of D and I or DEI, whichever version you want, and they're seriously questioning, what does it actually mean and what do we want it to mean now? And many of these organizations that I'm talking to come back to the term belonging and how do we include everyone? Okay, so if that's your intention, what are the kinds of stories? Now you've got that intention, you have your why. Go and get those stories and share them widely within the organization, because that's really going to help move the needle, as opposed to things again where you're checking the box and all your employees do not recognize themselves in those boxes, and they'll say again, well, there's another policy that just doesn't mean much, that uses acronyms that not many people understand, that I'm frankly not so motivated to understand. But if I'm hearing stories from colleagues that I haven't heard much from, and now that's becoming the language of the organization, it creates a culture that's really different and that's much more in integrity with its own values. So that would be certainly what we're hearing, and what I would recommend people sort of focus on the human.
You and I do talks and workshops, and a lot of times we're given a theme or a topic we said we're going to talk about, or the organizers give us one. And one of the most important exercises that I've done is to boil it down to one word of what is the most important word in this conversation. Is it fear? Is
Mm,
it navigating a challenge? Is it developing resilience? Like, what do I want to be at its core? And humans are like that. When we're having a discourse about something, and we think we have nothing in common with that person, or we're annoyed, or we're gonna have an eye roll because we see them coming. We're like, oh God, we're not gonna enjoy it. If you can get down to the basic ingredient of what that person is looking for, and it's usually they want to be seen, heard, and just have some context. Not always agree, but just do that. And that can be such a valuable bridge to follow the conversation the next time, or the interaction, because
mm,
not everything has to be solved. And I think a lot of those, yes, workshops are helpful. They're amazing people that we worked with, we've known, that does compelling experiences and trying to disrupt things. But again, it's on us to create those experiences and kind of develop a handbook for ourselves of what success looks like with that interaction. I'm thinking, I'm laughing because I'm like thinking about conversations where I had tough people that I took all my gumption to walk up to them in certain situations, knowing they were going to probably yell or carry on in offices. If I could get out there with just one acknowledgement that I heard them, I got them, that was a win.
Mm,
And the baby steps for the next time. And I kept
right.
showing being annoying. So figure out what a win is. There's a lot of people waiting for us to acknowledge them and just respect and just grant them the courtesy of an ear in our time of listening and just appreciate it. But it takes us, nobody, we're not going to achieve that in a handbook or a template, no matter how good we are and how much we do. So
Yeah.
clearly I've been mulling about this a little bit.
Yeah. You know what that brings to mind is I've got two experiences that just came up for me. In terms of making something real and using stories, and why stories can be helpful in this context is the one was, a leader, middle-aged white man, who, told a story. The idea was to tell stories about moments where you yourself felt excluded. And then you got to a point of inclusion at some point. Um, and it could even be the origin of why you want the workplace to be more inclusive. But the mandate was for the people that we worked with that they had to tell stories about moments where they felt excluded. And the reason was that you needed to be able to relate to other people's experiences of being excluded. And of course, the vast majority of people who had felt excluded in the organization were minorities. But that didn't mean that the middle-aged white leader of this big division in this organization didn't have those moments himself. And the more he
Mm,
could talk about that, the more he would open other people up to say what was really there, what really mattered. And I'll never forget, because this guy, I would have never known this, but he talked about having not one, but two kids out of three who were autistic, and finding out. And he told a story about finding out for each one, and then how that completely changed him and his wife's life, and what they then did, and what he also learned from that experience of what it took to create spaces in which those two kids felt comfortable and safe. That it was completely outside of his experience, but suddenly it had to be part of his experience because it was his kids. And so many
mhm,
people came to him afterwards, and they had such a great dialogue about what inclusion could look like based on that story in this organization. Even if it didn't mean that he was only addressing neurodiverse people. No, not at all. He was addressing everyone. And the people that came back to him were people from all walks of life. Um,
mhm,
that's number one. Number two was a woman who talked about something very relatable that I think everyone's felt at some point. Walking into a classroom and being excluded because she couldn't speak English. She had just
mm,
immigrated from Cuba, and this was in Florida, or no, actually, it wasn't in Florida because, well, yes, it was. It was in Florida, and she was mistakenly put into the 100% English class instead of the bilingual one. And
right.
so for 2 days, she sat in that classroom, didn't say a word, and it wasn't until one teacher noticed on the second day, she went up to her and she spoke to her and said, "Is there something that you're not understanding? Why aren't you speaking?" And she couldn't reply because she didn't understand English. And so the woman started speaking Spanish. And then she started just talking and talking and talking. Yes, I can't speak English, And finally, she was put into the right class. But I'll tell that story because these moments, especially in school, in childhood, maybe it's not about language for me, but it's about something else where I just had that feeling in my bones where, oh, this is not where I belong. And it doesn't feel good. And everybody in the room when she told that story could feel that too. They could go back to those experiences. And the other thing is they could also relate to that teacher, that one individual who said, "Hey, there's something going on with that kid." We've also all had that in our lives. We've had people in our lives that said, "Hey, let's look, we got to pay attention to Jerome. We got to pay attention to Julienne over there. Let's go see what's going on with them." very relatable. So I think, and then based on that, on those experiences, once you've created that common experience, it's much easier to create programs that are much more intentional and genuine, and where everyone is going to feel like, oh yeah, this is actually relatable. I do want to do this. I want to learn more about this. So those are kind of concrete stories that I thought would be worth
Yeah.
sharing here, because I think for our audience, you can take away something from that. And the idea is really, again, go back to the humans and ask them questions and ask them to share their stories.
So we're going to have an author coming on our podcast, and I believe she used this story, but like all good stories, I think they're worth sharing more than once. So I'm going to deal it for the moment because it just was such a artful example of humanity. There is a comedian, Sarah Silverman, who can be a pretty raucous and was never my go-to comedian, but apparently she was getting quite harassed in comments in maybe on media or social media by a viewer who was quite aggressive and dismissive, and she made a decision not to counter that person who was attacking her on every level. Did research, probably had some of her staff and go in and dig in to find out everything she could find out about this person by checking social media and posts, and found out this person was in a lot of pain,
Mm,
had horrible things that had happened, and was using her platform as for venting. And she reached out, and he became a convert because
mm,
she said she took the moment to see the human in this situation. So knew there was pain or knew there was suspicion and took a chance to do that rather than do everything else, block, everything we do when we're uncomfortable, we block, we walk away. And what if we all did that for somebody that just totally given us grief, or maybe if we did it for somebody else that we see that it's not being treated, the best. So
yeah.
that's my inspiration story. So you're gonna have to hear this one more than once from
Who's the maybe we can give a preview to our audience. Who's the author that you were referring to?
it's Achievement Martinet, The Art of Mingling. I 99% believe that's her story.
Good. We'll have confirmation soon.
Lot of authors, but I do believe that was from her about, the humanity of the situation and to go to the core. Like I said earlier, what is the thing that's being asked for or could be shared in that moment
Mm, mm.
that we could look for and just take a pause. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love this. I think that's the through line, right? Seek the human, make a connection, even if it feels daunting and hard, but who else is going to do it if it's not you, right? So everything starts with the individual, and it starts with you. So there you go, listeners. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Jules, for joining me here and talking about this really important topic. And how do we navigate these kinds of programs and initiatives, and make them as authentic as possible so that people really want to actually participate. So thank you so much. And again, as a reminder, if you've been inspired by this session, Julienne and I are both trainers and coaches in storytelling, and work with all kinds of leaders as well, and any kind of person really, teams or individuals. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can go to narrative.com, NARATIV.com. If you want to check out Sona Sherratt's full episode, you can go back to our website as well, where you'll find our complete archive. So again, if you've got anything you want to ask us, please come over. We're always ready to listen. And we look forward to seeing you next time on this podcast as well. Thanks so much.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.